Greetings, viewers. Eric the Car Guy here, back again with another live show where I answer your questions and sometimes butcher your names. This is show number 31, by the way. A few things we'll touch on before we really get started here. And that is, first of all, if you are posting questions to the YouTube video, I cannot see those questions, so that I won't be answering those questions. I will be taking the questions from the Google Plus page. So if you have questions during the show, you can post them to the Google Plus page. I will answer them there. If I'm not able to get to your questions during the show, or you have automotive questions, you weren't able to see this, anything like that, I ask that you head over to EricTheCarGuy.com. There is a welcome video there to tell you about all the stuff we have at EricTheCarGuy.com to help you with automotive issues when I'm not around, that type of thing. But let's not waste too much time today. Oh, and the next show will be December 17th. So if you missed tonight's show, so I do these every other week, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard. That will be the last show this year. The following Wednesday is going to be New Year's Eve. I got plans. And lastly, the last show, there was some issues with the internet connection. I hope that's not the case this time. But last time I had a really bad internet connection. That was not a camera issue. That was actually an internet connection issue. But why don't we just jump right in? Some of you have been posting questions. I usually post these, post about this event or create this event at least the Friday before it actually goes live. So that's the time to get your questions out there. But right now we don't have too many. So ask away, or I will make this work. We will definitely make this work. Anyhow, let's start with Whitney 191. I've got a problem with my 1968 Corvette. Just so happens I'm wearing a Corvette hat. The engine starts and runs fine, but seems to have plenty of power. But there are black fumes coming out of the rocker cover, and some out of the exhaust. Also, bubbles up the oil bubbles up the dipstick and leaks out the top. Engine is a 427, not the original. It's a crate engine. Interesting. So if it's a crate engine, it's a 427. I'm wondering if it's fuel injected, got all that stuff. I'm thinking it's one of those L series motors. That being the case, what's really puzzling is you've got what seems to be a lot of pressure, and that smoke is another interesting clue that you have there. What I'm thinking is, if it were me, I might pull that valve cover on the side where, and if it's only coming out one side, I might pull the valve cover on the side where the black smoke appears to be coming out. Maybe you've got a valve that's leaking. It's a crate engine, so it was freshly assembled. It is remotely possible that during the course of assembly that maybe a wrong part was inserted or something wasn't in there quite right. I'm hoping you haven't had it that long and something hasn't broke since then. So if it's a crate engine, I'm sure it has some form of warranty on it. But that is an interesting problem indeed. You say it runs fine and has plenty of power, but all that pressure inside the crankcase, that also leads me to think that maybe a PCV problem. Maybe a pinched hose someplace if the PCV isn't routed correctly. PCV stands for positive crankcase ventilation. Anytime you have a bunch of moving parts inside of an enclosed space, such as inside of an engine, you got pistons moving up and down, that type of thing, and inevitably there's going to be pressure built up inside that container. In order to relieve that pressure, what they used to do before the days of PCV is they used to just run a tube out the back of the engine out onto the road, and that's how they vented the pressure in the crankcase. But actually, interestingly enough, the Army wanted to drive Jeeps underwater. So having something that was just open to the air that went straight into the engine, or in this case water, would not necessarily be a good thing. So they made it a closed system. So they take that pressure and they route that back into the intake manifold to be those fumes to be burned. So it draws in fresh air, and then it also creates sort of a negative pressure inside the crankcase so that that pressure doesn't build up, and they use that special valve to do that with. There could be a problem with the PCV system, so you might want to look there also, because that will cause increased oil consumption and possibly the smoke and things that you're talking about here. But given that it might be under warranty, I would also look into that just in case. First place, look at the PCV system. Okay, and this one is kind of a, it's more of an opinion kind of question. Outskirts Customs Hello, ETCG. Love the show. I was going to ask what your take is on lowered vehicles. I have been wanting to lower my 1992 Ford Ranger, but with Indiana roads being full of potholes, I'm afraid of killing my oil pan after every bump. I'm not talking about laying it on the frame, just getting it a bit less wheel gap, muscle car stance. Um, I actually sort of did a video on this, modified vehicles. And by the way, there'll be links in the description to all kinds of stuff. So also anything that's discussed in this video, you can find additional information there, including a link to the video that I just mentioned. That being said, there's lowering a vehicle is actually a cool thing. Not against it. I don't want anybody to think that I'm not against it, because I'm actually going to do it to my own Fairmont. Thing is you have to be careful of how far. Me, I think 2 inches is like a nice place, but with a truck like that, you've got a little more room to play with. But with cars, I think 2 inches is about the max. I like around 1.5 inches between that and 2 inches, because that can still be drivable. But what I've seen is cars that are just like you mentioned, you didn't want to drop it on the frame, but cars that are really low, as a technician, those things are very difficult to get up onto a lift to service. So somebody brings me a lowered vehicle and I'm trying to get it up on a lift, I have to get a floor jack out just to lift it up enough to get the posts underneath the vehicle so I can lift it up to change oil or do whatever it is that I'm doing to it. So therein lies the rub. Also, the components that you use. What dictates ride height is going to be your springs. So with springs with lower or less coils, or that compress more, I prefer those as opposed to cutting coil springs in order to lower a vehicle. That's it's an easy, cheap way to cut coils, but you got to cut them exactly the same. And it's, well, let's just say it doesn't always work out. It's kind of a one-way street. Like once you pass that point and you've gone too far, and you can't go back without replacing the springs. Also, you change spring rates, things like that. And anytime you have older springs and you're going to lower something, I think it's best to get new springs just to begin with, because springs get old, they wear out, and they do affect the ride height. So yeah, but a lower stance does give you a lower center of gravity, and particularly with something like a truck, it handles better. So I've been in some cars that are lowered that handled extremely well, but like I said, you know, it's got to be done right. Plus, there's going to be alignment issues to address as well. So the lower it goes, depending upon your suspension geometry or how it's set up, that's something that can also be affected by ride height. So once you get everything all done, said, and put together, you're going to have to probably make a trip to the alignment shop or what have you to get everything lined up properly, or else you'll have some strange tire wear, that type of thing. But also, there's another way besides springs. Drop spindles on older vehicles. Older vehicles had the steering knuckle had a spindle, and you could purchase. And this is like the coolest, because you still maintain all the suspension travel that you normally would have with a vehicle. But instead of having, like, say this is a steering knuckle and this is a spindle coming out. So the drop spindle puts the spindle higher up so that it lowers the vehicle. So even though all the parts are relatively the same, the orientation of that spindle is different, and you can drop things that way. Might be something that's available for that truck. Not sure, because it's a popular truck. I'm sure you'll be able to find parts to do what you're looking to do with that. But like I said, my opinion, if it's done right, it's great. If it's not done right, man, it's kind of a nightmare. So good luck to you with that, and have fun. And that's what this is all about. I mean, figure it out. And it's okay to go out there and make mistakes doing this kind of stuff, because you figure, what's going on. As far as your oil pan goes, you probably get a skid plate. It wouldn't be a bad idea if you were lowering, because you're talking about if you're driving fast on those country roads, you might hit a dip or something like that. Taking out your oil pan is pretty expensive. So yes, you are right to be concerned about that. And perhaps a skid plate can help alleviate some of those fears that you have there. All right. Let's see. That is a different question altogether. Okay, Miyamoto Masashi. Hey Eric, here's my question. What should we do? Where do we start from, and what do we check for when restoring old cars? Are there any orderly steps to restoring them? I want to do a project on a Toyota Corolla KE70RG built circa 79 through 87. Maybe you could suggest the best ways to restore old cars. Thanks, by the way. Good question, and I'm actually going to be embarking on this journey in the not too distant future, hopefully next year, with my own 79 Ford Fairmont. And one of the things that I've done is I have sat down, and I'm not restoring, I'm actually doing something different. I'm modifying the vehicle. So that's a little bit different than doing a restoration. A restoration, when you say that, it's sort of a mixed bag. When you say restoration, that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The purist will say, you know, all original equipment, all the little paint marks and everything back to the way it should be, you know, concours d'elegance kind of deal. And then other people who just want something to be restored to its former glory, maybe with some modern upgrades to make it more drivable. So there's a gajillion different ways to go about restoring. And that is the first task I think that you need to do, is you need to sit down, you need to figure out what your idea is for the outcome of that restoration. What is your goal? I mean, you put it down. Like, don't just go at it and say, I'm going to buy a bunch of parts and bolt them all together and it's going to work, because that's probably not going to work, and it's probably going to cost you a lot of money. And you're probably going to be one of those people that has a project that sits in your garage for years and years and years and never gets done. That's what happens to projects without direction. I would say a plan. The plan is central to your success in doing this. Otherwise, it's vehicle restoration or doing vehicle modifications on a grand scale is a daunting task. It's a big job, and it's easy to become overwhelmed. I've seen it several times where people start out on a weekend, they start taking things off and they get it all apart, and most of the way apart. And then they realize they have to put it all back together, and they realize how much more work there is as they're taking things apart. And particularly with the Toyota that you're talking about there, I'm hoping it's not from the Northeast, because those were quite famous for rusting away to nothing. So that's something you're certainly going to have to deal with. It involves several different skill sets, several different things that you might have to farm out. Like, you might have to get with an engine builder to have them get the engine put together for you, or a body shop to get it all cleaned up, and all the body panels that need replacing, or floor pans or things like that, as I mentioned, the rust. So number one, figure out a plan. And also, when you go out and choose the vehicle, try to choose, well, and it's not easy with older vehicles, because you're kind of going to get what you're going to get if you got your heart set on a particular model. Some models are harder to find than others, and that can drive up the cost of price and your restoration. So all these things need to be considered. Find yourself some forums where people may have already done this work, or this type of work. Go to car shows. Spend a lot of time doing research before you ever get started. That way you can formulate a decent plan. Maybe make some friends in the process that you can call up or hit up online and say, you know, hey, I just ran into this problem as I'm trying to do this. Have you run into this? Do you know somebody who's run into this? I'm trying to find this part that nobody seems to have. These are things that you're going to, it's the details. The details will destroy you with projects like this. And I know they've got all these car shows that are out now that are very popular on people restoring and buying old cars and doing this kind of thing. And they cram it all into a half hour, but there was a lot of effort that went into that, and a lot of people. If you look at these shops, you don't see just one person doing this work. You see several people doing this work, and they still struggle to make deadlines. I want you to take that into consideration. These are experienced people. This is what they do, and they struggle with it. Yes, they love it. They have a good time, but there's a lot to it. And I'm hoping to explore this and more with my own project in the coming year with the Fairmont, to try to help illustrate, because there are a lot of people out there that have these big dreams for these, you know, restorations like what you're talking about here, but they often end up in, well, just sitting around for years and years in the garage till somebody comes along and takes it off your hands for pennies on the dollar. And also, lastly, I will put in, anything you modify or restore to your own taste is exactly that. If you are looking to do this to increase the value of something like this, or you're investing, you're really on thin ice, because 99.9% of the time you are devaluing that vehicle. It's very rare that you make a vehicle more valuable by doing this restoration, especially one that's done to your taste. So once again, talk to those people at the shows, find out what's expected, find out what's good to do, what's not good to do, what mistakes have been made before, and try to learn from other people's mistakes before you ever get involved. I wish you luck. Moving on. Okay, we have Shaharim Ha. Hi, Eric. I have an Audi 2006, 2005.5 V7 shaped 2-liter turbo, front-wheel drive, 100,000 miles. I started noticing my compressor putting a huge load irregular on the engine. I'm assuming AC compressor. After some kicks and noises, it stopped cooling in traffic and started making the air wave sound, but works fine in highway. I end up paying $50 just to hear it from a dude that my compressor is bad. After a second visit to the guy, he just sucked out the AC gas, got mad, and left. So I went to Goodyear and had my system checked again, and they told me there was no pressure gas, all with the same type of AC device like your friend had in your last video. So I had to go back the next morning to ask him just to refill the system only, please. Well, what got me thinking why now, even though the AC is not cooling yet, the high pressure pipe gets super cold if I turn the AC when standing. Thank you, love the show, watched every episode. I'm trying to get into mechanic school. Money's a problem, so that's why I do this DIY Audi stuff so I can learn. So far, the engine timing. All right. Thank you for your question, and thank you for your comments on my work. I'm grateful that you watch every show. I'm gonna preface this by saying I don't necessarily recommend AC work for the inexperienced for several reasons. First of all, you're inexperienced. Second of all, it often requires some specialized equipment and tools, and sometimes licensing, in order to do that type of service. Aside from that, AC work can give even experienced technicians difficulties, which is what you might have run into here. That said, when you turn on the AC, it brings the engine down, which probably means that the compressor is working or the engine is working really hard to work the compressor. There's some form of extra resistance there. Why it's there? Well, that's what you need to find out. There could be a restriction someplace in the system that's causing the compressor to work harder. The compressor could be bad, as the first technician had stated. It could be something with the compressor clutch. It could be, well, it could be a lot of things, if I'm honest. And based on your description, it's really difficult for me to say one way or the other. Sometimes what can happen is your engine idle controls don't work correctly. So it may seem like that the AC compressor is bringing things down, but what is actually happening is the idle control valve is not bringing the idle up to compensate for the increased load that AC compressor would put on the system. So there's more than one possible cause, and it depends on where it's coming from. So it could be a problem with your idle circuit. So it's difficult to say that one way or the other. You know, I really don't care about updating my flash. Is it just me, or does it seem like every time you turn on a computer, you have to update your flash program? That's just super annoying. This is an automotive show. We're not going to talk computers today. Okay. There's some people answering questions for me. Okay. Here we go. We have Munir Howletter. Once again, sorry about the name thing. Have difficulties with that. Always kind of have. 04 Honda Accord. My coolant seems to be disappearing. This started happening after I changed my coolant last year. I burped it properly with the coolant funnel. It does not leak for sure. I need to fill my reservoir every 2 weeks. I don't even drive every day, once or twice a week. Okay, if you bled the system as you stated and you did it correctly, then that shouldn't be an issue. I will say that normally much of coolant is water. So over time, particularly in hot climates, the coolant will disappear, and that's because it evaporates and goes into the atmosphere. The water component of that coolant can evaporate. So topping off your coolant every oil change is not uncommon. Every 2 weeks seems a little excessive. I've done a video about pressure testing cooling systems, and this is what I suggest you do. I'll put a link in the description after this is all said and done to that video. But the idea of that test is to pressurize the system, and if there are any leaks, it will force those leaks to reveal themselves. Also, coolant is really good about leaving stains. So whether it's blue coolant or green coolant or what have you, I'm thinking you have blue in that accord. It's really good about leaving a residue wherever the leak is. So sometimes just a good visual inspection will reveal where a leak is. On Hondas in particular, I like to look around the radiator, particularly the top seam. Many Asian makes use a type of radiator that uses an aluminum core with plastic tanks that are crimped to the top of that with a gasket around it. Sometimes that gasket goes bad and begins to leak, and you'll notice there'll be a coolant just sort of collecting around that seam. Sometimes that happens just by removing the radiator cap. So, but a pressure test is going to help you, and also a good visual inspection is probably a good place to start. You didn't mention how many miles were on it. If it's got several miles on it, you might be looking to the water pump along the front of the engine, see if that might be leaking, something like that. But pressure testing is probably going to reveal where that leak is. All right, moving on. We have Ashif Bakash. Hey Eric, my wife's 1998 Acura 3.5 RL. The car, the in-car heat only blows warm air when you press the accelerator above 2,000 RPM. Water pump and timing belt done last year. How do you bleed the system? Is this rad or heater core clogged? Thanks. You know, it just so happens that not this Friday, but the following Friday will be a video on this exact topic. I did a video on solving no heat problems in your vehicle. Just so happens my Vigor, my Acura Vigor was having that problem, and I made a video about how I repaired it, use it as a general step-by-step in solving no heat issues. Everything you're describing says air in the cooling system. So you were right to make that conclusion, in that you might have an issue with air in the system, because that is one of the classic symptoms. To do that, as far as how you go about bleeding that air, well, it just so happens I have a video about how to do that very thing. It's called How to Bleed a Cooling System. I'll post a link to that in the description, but just a brief synopsis of that is that I like to use a spill-free funnel, but it's not necessary, and that's something that you put in the top of the radiator in place of the radiator cap. It's a nice big funnel that can house all the coolant as it expands and heats up and that type of thing. But the idea is to put your temperature inside the car all the way to hot, but the blower fan off. Then you start the engine and run it without the radiator cap. If you don't have that funnel, put a catch pan underneath, because things are going to come bubbling out, and don't fill the radiator up all the way, because it's the coolant will rise and bubble out the top of the radiator. That's what's so nice about that funnel. Run it at 2,000 RPMs until the cooling fans come on. And if both cooling fans come on, you were able to verify that. You know that the thermostat has opened at that point, and at that time, that should have taken all the air out of the system. It's a little bit different on vehicles with expansion tanks that don't have the traditional radiator cap. They have a pressurized reservoir off to the side. I do the same procedure. It's just I leave the cap off that pressurized reservoir and use that like it's my spill-free funnel. So I pretty much do the same thing. I just use that pressurized reservoir, also known as an expansion tank, as my spill-free funnel. Also, you don't want to fill those all the way up either. But yes, air in the cooling system, and there'll be a video on that in about 2 weeks or so. Let's see, I think I missed one down here. La 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 la, dead air. This is just a statement. Here we go. We have Ryan Beck. I got that one. Hey, Eric, first time question asker, long time watcher. Thank you for that. Have a 1996 Honda Accord LX 5-speed. Cool car. The inside of my car smells like fuel whenever I pump fuel. I haven't checked for leaks yet, but read on forums the smell of fuel could be hundreds of things. It's not a constant smell, just for the first hour or so after I fill up when I'm filling up. Any help would be great. A couple of things. You're right, it could be a lot of things, but let's narrow it down to not so much 100 things, just things involving the fuel system. In that instance, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a 96, so you might have a check engine light there. for an evaporative emissions code. And evaporative emissions basically means that the fumes inside the fuel system, the gas tank, the engine, wherever, they don't want to vent those to the atmosphere. So they sealed that system. But you can't just have it sealed because things expand, they contract, the gases inside there do that. So they've come up with this elaborate system that allows the vapors inside the fuel tank to be sequestered inside a charcoal canister. And they do this through a series of pipes and valves and that type of thing. I'm wondering if one of those components inside that system has failed. Now, normally the way you find those leaks is with a smoke machine. That's the easiest way to do it. Now, there are videos on the internet about how to make your own, because purchasing a smoke machine is kind of expensive. But with that smoke-filled environment, any leaks that are present, that smoke will come out. You can find vacuum leaks this way too. I think Scotty Kilmer made a video about blowing smoke, cigar smoke inside of something like that. I don't recommend doing that because we're talking about fuel and ignition source being a cigar. That might not be the best option, but something like a smoke machine might help. Also, there are occasions where there is what's called a rollover valve inside of fuel tanks, and that is its namesake. In the event of a rollover, you don't want the fuel to start dumping out the filler neck. So there's this valve that's set up. Well, actually, no, that would be more like when you go to fill it and it keeps clicking off. So forget about that. I would say that you probably have a leak somewhere. Evaporative emissions is where I'd be looking. Although it being a 96, if you're in the Rust Belt, take a look. There may be a plastic cover over the tube that goes from where you fill up the gas tank, or where you fill up on the side of the vehicle that goes down into the gas tank. And there's another tube that runs along the side of it. I have known Hondas on occasion for those tubes to rust out and get small, tiny pinholes, rust holes in them. You might want to look there. And if I'm not mistaken, you can replace that separate from the gas tank, so you don't have to purchase a gas tank if you have that issue. You may be able to purchase that tube separately. So look around for leaks is what I would do. And more importantly, smell around for leaks. I've actually written an article about trying to track down things like this. All right, let's see if somebody's posted something recently, because I've gotten almost to the end. Let's see, we have Cowboy the Bouncer. Hey, Eric, I have a 1999 Ford Expedition, 110,000 miles. And it's cold outside, so when I start it, there's a scratchy-like rush of liquid sound from the engine as soon as it starts and then goes away. What is that? And does driving your car a lot make the engine wear out faster? Okay, that's two questions. As far as that noise that you're hearing, I'm going to say maybe air in the cooling system, because it's not so much from the engine that you hear it. A lot of times people hear this inside the dash. And that could indicate air in the cooling system. And go back to earlier in the video and also down in the description about removing that air from the cooling system. That's where I'd be looking as far as that goes. You're not going to really hear the oil or anything like that. Things that make the engine wear out faster, driving it a lot, no. Not changing your oil on a regular basis, yes. The most important thing you can do for any vehicle is change the oil on a regular basis. It helps the seals, it helps the metal parts in the inside, it gives you better fuel economy, and use the correct viscosity. Use the viscosity it's called for by the manufacturer. Go outside of that, well, you may be asking for trouble if you do so. But I say the best thing for the longevity of any engine is regular maintenance, and changing the oil being at the top of that list. Yes, coolant, that's also important, but I would say more than anything, it's changing that oil. That just does so much for so many different things. We got time for another one. Roger Y. Hey, Eric, I have a 2005 Honda Accord, and when I start it from a cold engine, like on a cold morning, there is a loud whining noise. If I turn the wheel, it gets louder and goes away after the car warms up a bit. It sounds like it's coming from the Serpentine Belt area. Honda dealership said it is a power steering rack leak. Is this accurate? And if so, do I need to replace it? Any leaks in the power steering system, and I just went through this with my Honda Odyssey, and I did a power steering pump rebuild. On your vehicle in particular, though, was 2005 still covered within that? I'm trying to think, maybe. There was an issue with air getting into the power steering fluid, and there's a small little O-ring on the outlet. Well, actually, it's the inlet from the reservoir to the power steering pump. there's an O-ring underneath that inlet. So there's one bolt that holds it on. Watch my power steering rebuild video, and you'll see that O-ring. And if air gets sucked into that area, then it will cause everything to make noise because air is getting in that system. And you can just pull that little red cap off the power steering fluid reservoir and look down in there while this is happening. If you see a bunch of bubbles, then yes, then you're probably getting air introduced into that system. That O-ring on the power steering pump is not the only place. There could be issues down on the power steering rack itself. And I'll go out and say now that, you know, I went through all that trouble on my van to rebuild the power steering pump, eventually ended up replacing the power steering pump, and it wasn't like a week and a half later it started making noise again. I think it started making noise again because it's got a leak at the power steering rack. So leaks at the power steering rack can also cause those types of issues, but you really have to track down where those leaks are. And if it's a leak at the power steering rack, it should be fairly easy to spot, although sometimes they leak behind those boots and the bellows. And for those, just remove that outer clamp on there and maybe stick a screwdriver or something up inside the boot. And if fluid comes out, fluid's not supposed to come out there. So if fluid comes out when you do that, you have a leak inside the power steering rack. Now, a lot of people have asked me, they've said, Eric, should I replace that power steering rack, or can I go in and just replace the seals and save myself some money? Good question. In fact, I'm going to attempt, I've never attempted to reseal a power steering rack. So many times, including with that power steering pump rebuild that I did, you go in with the best of intentions and maybe there's a worn out part or something like that that you're not aware of, don't see, and you're taking a risk. So can you save money by resealing something like that? Probably yes, but if it doesn't work out, you spent that money and that time to do that, and then you have to go back and do it again if it's not successful, and you replace the rack. So you end up spending even more. As a technician, you don't make those gambles. You just go in, you replace the power steering rack, and that's that. So that's just how we've gone about it, or how I've gone about it in the past. However, lots of you have asked me about doing reseals on power steering racks, and eventually at some point I hope to do that. And by the way, in order to get that rack out of my Odyssey, what I'm going to have to do is drop the subframe. Now, I've done that several times, but let's just put it this way. It's not an easy task, and we're getting into the cold season, and rolling around in a cold concrete trying to do something like that is not very appealing to me. So I may just let that thing be noisy until spring. I believe that wraps up this week's show. The next show, as I said, will be December 17th, and that will be the last one this year for 2014. Yay! Once again, if you're posting questions to the Google Plus event after the event has concluded, I won't be answering those. I won't be answering the YouTube questions that are posted there. Apologies for all of that, but EricTheCarGuy.com is always available 365, 24/7. So you can go there and get things answered. Also, links, additional information, all kinds of stuff will be put into the description of this video. You got to give me like a half hour or whatever it is for me to get that stuff put together. But once that's done, there'll be all kinds of additional things there. Did I miss anything? No, other than thank you so much for watching. I really enjoy hanging out with you. But once again, we will do it again on December 17th, and you can start posting your questions the Friday before that, all the way through that weekend. But I had a great time. I hope you did too. And I close each of my videos with be safe, have fun, and of course, stay dirty. See you next time.